Mr. Simmons, you said, and I'm paraphrasing, that price volatility is destroying price elasticity. Is that a fair?
No, I said they're destroying price signals.
Price signals.
Yeah.
And do you mind, as an economist, if I turn that into price volatility is destroying price responsiveness, the ability of consumers, of demand to respond to price, or is that a misinterpretation?
No, I think that's basically part of the problem. In a perfect world, I think many economists think that it's price signals that basically give you an indication of what to do. And I think we're now into this wild volatility that every time we start getting a price signal, then the volatility basically takes it away.
What data do you have, or can you back up your assertion that price volatility currently or in the present period is greater than it has been, say, since the early 70s? And second, does your firm try to estimate or track the price elasticity of demand for petroleum products?
Well, the data on price volatility is very easy to see. We had two phenomenal spikes in prices in the 70s. But for basically the last 50 years, we've had relatively stable oil and gas prices. And in the last sort of 3 or 4 years, starting the 1st of August, we saw a collapse in motor gasoline prices to the extent of 31% in 6 weeks. That is basically not normal behavior. Natural gas prices have swung in the course of the last year from $15 per million cubic feet after the hurricanes down to $4 about 8 weeks ago, now back to $8. They say you just can't run an industry that basically has those sort of swings. And I think until we address that sometime, we're going to basically destroy the ability for the industry to gear up and have a prayer at meeting some of the supply challenges through expanding and building new rigs and people. And so that's my big concern.
My question here is about ExxonMobil. Are they really not awake yet? I can't believe that. I really have a hard time with the credibility that they aren't fully aware of a lot of these kinds of issues. And if that's the case, then why all of the PR out there, the rosy PR? And is it perhaps a fear of share value and trying to maintain share value? Just some insights on the inside of ExxonMobil, if you have them. Thank you.
I don't think ExxonMobil is all that much different to most of the other majors, but one thing that the majors do have that we don't is some of the data which Matt talked about a few minutes ago. He actually said, we don't have data which allows us to study in detail the depletion of oil fields, the way in which well productivity declines with time. And Matt's absolutely correct. We don't have it. ASPO doesn't have it, but ExxonMobil do. So the industry itself does know more about the way in which fields are behaving, wells are behaving. And it may be that if we had access to all of that data, we would refine some of our estimates. So it's possible that the reason that these companies appear to be so much more optimistic is because they actually know more than we do. I tried to say in my talk that we know very little. And one of the things that I would like to see, slide aside, one of the things I would like to see happen in ASPO is that we attract more people into the organization who do have an industry background and can bring some of this data and some of these ideas with them. So one possibility is that they know more than we do and that we're more optimistic than we should be. A second one, I guess, is that Exxon and the other majors are fearful of what a decline in oil supply is going to mean for them as companies. If we're going to see oil supply by these companies decline, and it's not accompanied by huge increases in oil price, then their businesses are going to suffer. So I guess they're not going to come out in public and say, don't buy Exxon stock, don't buy BP stock, because it's not going to be worth anything in 10 years' time.
I find an enormous disconnect between people that I meet that are out in the field at Exxon or BP or Shell and the executive office suite. And the number of times where do you think our senior guys are coming from? I mean, what do they know we don't? So I actually think that at the top, They believe what they're saying. I've been on several programs with senior Exxon people, and they leave little certainty that basically they don't believe what they're saying, but I don't think they understand the power of decline rates.
My question is, do you think that either of you or both of you think that there may be, we may be reaching a psychological tipping point, especially among the national oil companies, in terms of their desire to produce at the maximum rate, given a new future view that says that this stuff is going to run out, and a concern that A, they have people that are going to need it for a long time, and B, to the extent they don't produce at maximum rates, they may not lose revenue because the price would stay high enough to give them both the oil in the ground and the price they need.
I think that's undoubtedly the case. I think the major oil producing countries of the world are well aware that their own economic interests may be best served by reducing their oil production. If you're in Abu Dhabi or you're a Kuwait, you don't need to do very sophisticated cash flow analysis to see that if oil prices are going to shoot up in the future, that you may be a lot better keeping your oil in the ground for the next 30, 40 years than producing it in 5 years' time, taking dollars and putting them into a bank which may or may not return them to you 20 years later. So I think that certainly influences the way which the OPEC countries behave. I worked in Abu Dhabi in the late 1960s when Shaif and Zakum development, those are the two biggest fields in Abu Dhabi, when those were being developed. And the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company made it quite clear that they did not want to see depletion rates of more than about 1.5% per year for these fields, because they wanted production to last. They wanted their grandchildren to have the benefits of cash from oil. They didn't need any more money. Producing at those sort of depletion rates gave them all the money they needed. And if you, I don't know, maybe you've been to Abu Dhabi or been to Dubai in the last 5 or 6 years, if you see what they're doing with the money they're getting from production at current rates, why on earth would they want to produce more? And they undoubtedly could produce more, certainly in the short term. There's nothing, the Middle East, sorry, I beg your pardon, the Abu Dhabi oil fields, for instance, they could, if they made the investment, undoubtedly produce 50% more in 5, 8 years' time than they're producing now. So it's a deliberate decision to delay.
Dr. Sadat Al-Husseini, who's the retired executive vice president of Saudi Aramco and pretty well known internally as the brains, has publicly several times on programs that I've been on with Dr. Al-Husseini said that the Saudi Arabian oil fields could quite easily produce 12.5, 13 million barrels a day for a short period of time, but they shouldn't. Because the higher they produce, the faster they'll decline. That's Dr. Ali Bakhtiari's message that he's been speaking out very loudly about. So I think the real issue is, what's the sane rate to produce? And I would watch Russia very carefully, because I think that's what Putin's energy advisors have now realized, is that the oligarchs were basically creaming these fields and letting up to a second collapse. And so I think you're going to start seeing a lot of operators around the world realize that they basically need to back off their rates of production and basically produce at a lower level so that you have a longer period of time before you go into a tailspin.
Has anyone tried to quantify, what's the supply elasticity, if you will, as the price goes up? How much would reserves really grow at oil at $120 or $240 a barrel? Is that a 2% growth, or is that a doubling? What would we really get out of that?
Well, I'll take first stab at it and say that look at the numbers of non-OPEC supply outside the former Soviet Union over the last decade. I mean, we saw prices go up 8-fold. Now, maybe it was the volatility that people didn't react properly, but we also took the rig count up by 1/3, and we now have every rig in the world at work. I don't believe there's a layer of oil that basically all of a sudden opens itself up once oil prices double from where they are today, if they do. So I think the prices are now high enough that virtually everything we could do, we would do. And it's not having the effect that anyone would have thought. And once you're out of drilling rigs, it doesn't matter how high the price goes. You can't basically build a rig overnight. So I think it's going to actually be the utter lack of drilling capacity that's going to end up being the death knell of any sort of hope for a big supply response, regardless of where prices go. Lower prices, on the other hand, have an immediate negative impact on supply.
Well, I think the problem is with the volatility in the prices. I'm a reservoir engineer. I spent nearly 40 years trying to see how we could improve or increase recovery efficiency from individual fields. And how do you improve it? How do you increase it? Well, you improve it or increase it by doing things, and doing things costs money. So what a reservoir engineer does is says, if we applied process X, or if we drilled more wells, or if we did something, how much more oil would it produce? Undoubtedly, spending more money increases recovery efficiency. The problem is that it doesn't generally increase it very much. And secondly, you don't, as an oil company, you don't make investment decisions unless you believe that high oil prices are going to be around for a long time. So the fact that oil prices are $50 today, $60 a barrel today, if you don't believe those prices are going to be sustained, even though you might believe that you could increase recovery efficiency, you're not going to make the investment involved. Most oil companies, when they make investment decisions, make them on an oil price which is far removed from the spot price on the day. I don't know what ExxonMobil or BP or Shell are using today, but I know that about 18 months ago they were still working with oil prices for investment decisions of between $20 and $25 a barrel, and I doubt those have changed very much. Those are the levels which the companies believe truly will be sustained. So yes, spending more money will give you higher recovery, but companies are very reluctant to spend that additional money until they understand how oil prices are going to behave in the future.
I wanted to ask Matt if he could elaborate a little bit more about future gas production. I know you've talked a little about being near peak on that as well. Could you talk a little bit about the overseas situation?
Well, I think the single biggest difficulty about addressing even North American gas is the utter lack of good data. The Texas Railroad Commission has made heroic strides to improve their data quality, and they basically still have stunning differences between what they report this month and what a year and a half later it becomes in revisions. What worries me about global natural gas is that there are too many areas now that are just like the US and Canada, out of the blue went into decline. I would watch very, very closely what's going on in Russia, because in fact it turns out that 3 of their 4 giant gas fields are in irreversible decline and declining fast. And I think that basically this crisis that we had this winter when the Ukraine got shut off and when Italy then got shut off was a wake-up call to a lot of the people in the European Union that they tied their fate to a belief that Siberian gas was bountiful and unlimited. The UK basically, even though there were some people warning that this was going to happen, have now gone into almost a free fall of natural gas decline. Their May over May numbers this year were down 24% in a year, which just highlights how fast natural gas declines when it goes into steep declines, because it is a vapor. When you get 50% of your supply base in decline, the law of numbers just say that it becomes really hard to bring on a new area fast enough to overcome the decline rates. So you get back once more to this mystery of what are the decline rates, and we should know a lot more about that.
Heard about the North Sea, we've heard about Canada. What about our neighbor to the south?
I'll tell you what some pretty knowledgeable people within the senior ranks of PMEX are actually saying. And Jeremy's presentation about tertiary recovery, Cantarell basically was the last giant oil field to be brought on stream that produced over 1 million barrels a day. And finally, about 7 years ago, they embarked on what turned out to be almost a $20 billion nitrogen injection, which is the other tertiary recovery method, and it worked fabulously. And they basically got Cantarell up to 2.2 million barrels a day, and then the program ended. And Cantarell is in decline. The big question is, how fast will the decline be? It's now down to about 1,700,000 barrels a day. The worst case estimates by the people that know the most fear that it might be down to 600,000 barrels a day by 2009, 2010. That would be catastrophic for the United States economy, because that Mexican oil is our single most important, along with Canada, oil importer, and it's 3 days journey away. Venezuela's oil is 6 days journey away. Nigeria's oil is 25 to 30 days away, so you just couldn't make that up. So that's actually the single most important field that we should be worried about from a U.S. perspective.
After this summer's jolly media blitzkrieg of Jack 2, the brave little 6,000 barrel a day test well that saved the world, What do you suggest that we as ASPO members or as members of the reality-based community do to counter this kind of journalism? And second, what kind of demand destruction would we need to see in economic terms to see a substantial slowing in the demand picture you've painted?
Well, the answer to the first part of your first question, I think, is education. I mean, the reason that that so much unbased, unrealistic opinion was expressed about Jack was because people didn't understand the numbers. They didn't understand what the numbers meant. They didn't understand the uncertainty, the potential errors in the numbers. So I think educating people is the only way which is going to prevent, the only thing that's going to prevent a similar sort of mass euphoria about events like that. As to what sort of reduction in demand we'd have to see, I don't know. I leave that to one of the many economists in the room. I'm just a mere engineer. I don't know.
You know, we have a lot of empirical data about this issue of price elasticity on demand, and the data basically says that it's non-existent. And I point out all the time 3 interesting countries and their behavior of how they've adjusted to high prices of motor gasoline, and they happen to be Australia, Norway, and Kenya. The reason I use all 3 is that they all basically have been experiencing paying about $7 a gallon over the last year. And basically their driving patterns haven't really changed over the last 3 or 4 years. Kenya is the most surprising of all because it happens that Greater Nairobi now has about 9 million people, up from 500,000 people when I was first there in 1970. And I was there last summer and couldn't believe the traffic jams between 6 a.m. in the morning and 10 a.m. in the morning and between 4 and 8 p.m. at night. They're just as bad as in Mexico City or Sao Paulo, and they're paying $7 a gallon. That's basically effectively $300 a barrel. In Australia, they actually drive further distances than we do in the United States because their driving patterns. And so there's absolutely no evidence that at $7 a gallon, Australians are starting to tighten their belt. So I'd say that from that data, we have pretty good evidence that prices would have to go way up before people really substantially start to change their driving pattern. There's no question that sticker shock is real and that people get mad as hell when they basically are paying another 50 cents a gallon. But I also think here in the United States, we need to be very, very realistic and realize that when we get to $3.20 a gallon, it turns out to be 20 cents a cup. Now, 20 cents a cup doesn't sound like a lot of gasoline, but if you have access to a passenger car, 6 of you can get in the car and go 2 miles. And I would just argue that if you don't have the gasoline, try negotiating with the guy on a donkey in a cart and say, would you basically take my 5 buddies and I for a couple of miles for 20 cents and get out of the way for a string of expletives, how stupid you are, and finally you'll pay about $10 to go 2 miles. That's probably what we should be paying for our motor gasoline. So I don't think we're going to see any sort of phenomenal relief because of the demand destruction. In the meantime, it's the developing world that basically just, they don't really act. I mean, China basically doesn't care what they pay. They're sitting on $1 trillion of cash resources right now, and this is a showstopper for them. So I think that we're going to be brutally surprised that the economists believe that demand will soon come under behavior because of price, because there's no data to indicate that's going to happen.
Well, I come from a country which does have $7 oil, or whatever the number is that Matt was talking about. And I think part of the problem when you start thinking about demand destruction is that because of the ways in which we've developed our cities, and the lack of public transport in most of our cities, people don't have a lot of choice, a lot of easy choice when it comes to getting to work. So a lot of the cars that you see between 6 and 10 and 4 and 8, whatever the hours are out there not because people have essentially chosen to travel by car to work, but because they don't have any easy option. So it's not a demand which is going to go away very easily.
One is, to what extent do the people that control energy in the rest of the world, the Arabs, so on, perceive of our difficulties and the fact we don't have any control over that, and how are they going to handle our peak oil?
How much do the people, the governments of the OPEC countries care about America's oil consumption problems? I don't want to insult Americans, but I think...
Go ahead.
I think some of the things that you've done around the Middle East or caused to happen around the Middle East over the last 10 years have resulted in there being virtually no sympathy for most aspects of America's problems. So I think it's very sad, but I think that's the truth.